what I was praying about of noticing the life that is in the dirt. And I've probably mentioned this before, and you'll probably hear it again too, because I tend to repeat myself. But um, giving plants to me is not usually a very good idea. If it's cut flowers, well, I have some pretty decent allergies, and but even though I love it and I'll still do it, and you'll see pictures of it because I want to enjoy it for longer and know that I can look at a picture and it not, conjure up allergies. But perennials also because I just have the blackest of black thumbs, and no matter what I do, I follow directions, but I always forget to keep up, what you need to do in order to keep them alive. Yes. But this was something that I had not seen before. Oh, yeah, not quite yet. Sorry. You've seen some of these pictures on Valentine's Day. My girls gave me these beautiful lilies, and they would bloom. Some of them were already open, and some were not quite open, and so they kind of staggered in their blooming. And so I was able to enjoy them for like a couple of weeks. But this one, after all all the rest had bloomed and dropped their petals to the countertop, I waited to see this last one open. And I waited and waited. And I thought, wow, this flower is really afraid to open up. It really does not want to expose what's inside. And here it is, all alone, doing nothing. It grew brown and shriveled and held every last seed and pollen inside, dying with no hope of being a part of creating something new. Pretty great metaphor for this thing. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it will remain alone, a single grain. But if the grain of wheat dies, it bears much fruit. It not only lives, but bears fruit. If I try it alone, all of life, but especially in grief, I remain alone. But if I'm willing to fall to the ground, die, exposed, vulnerable, in whatever way that is necessary, acceptance of the grief, awareness of how it's impacting my life, reconcile a broken relationship, I will not only, with Jesus and all of creation working together to bring the nutrients and water and sunlight, a history of rotating the fields, laboring to till and tend the land, I will not only grow and become something new, I will bear much fruit. And unlike this lily, I will blossom, willing to fall to the ground and die. Rest. Maybe it's rest. Requiem is a mass held to bring rest to the souls of the dead. The Latin word requiem means rest. The musical composition set for the mass, or it can also be mean to be an act or token of remembrance. And it is another form of lament, another way in another culture. It is the first word in the Latin prayer, Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine. Eternal rest grant them, O Lord. And for a long time, the texts were sung in Gregorian melodies. In the 15th century, Johannes Ockeghem, I think, is the earliest surviving polyphonic setting, the counter melodies sung simultaneously. I think many of you have probably heard some Gregorian chants. This is kind of how they would do it. And the Council of Trent standardized the texts in 1563, so clearly it's based in Western European culture. But by the 16th century, more and more composers set the Requiem Mass, and there are currently over 2,000 compositions. They're super long, and the attendees are meant to stand the entire time, and a full Requiem Mass can be 3.5 hours. A bit of time. One of the most well-known examples, of course, is Mozart's, which is completed by a student, Franz Xavier Süssmayr. It's actually only about an hour. At the time of Mozart's death in Vienna in particular, it was common for only a few then to attend the burial. Although I would imagine after standing 3.5 hours in the church listening to all this music, nobody would be especially keen on standing for the burial. Personally, I prefer the Irish wake where there's celebration and storytelling. And then go at home and listen to the Requiem, in the comfort of my home. Fall asleep, maybe. It's beautiful music, but that would be rather taxing, 3.5 hours. The Requiem is usually considered the purview, of course, of the high church and afforded those who can afford the favor of the church. And so that became problematic. Still, it's meant to be a song of lament, of prayers lifted in word and in glorious music. But anyone can compose a lament or a requiem. And one that makes more sense to me, I heard in the musical Dear Evan Hansen. Has anybody seen that show? I know only one person in my family. And it just came out a few years ago on Broadway, and then it was on television, a version of it. Evan is a high schooler with an anxiety disorder. And on the advice of his therapist, Evan begins writing letters to himself to reframe how he'll perceive each new day. Well, early in the story, Connor, an acquaintance of Evan's, commits suicide. And Evan's letters then start to describe a friendship with Connor that never existed. But they take on new life. It helps all those who did know Connor, his friends, and his family, to deal with his decision to take his own life. It's very interesting. There's a brilliant song near the beginning in which Evan's mom and Connor's mom lament the seeming impossibility of parenting teens, and it's called Anybody Have a Map? It's great, because there's no map, right? Still, Connor's sister Zoe refuses to mourn her brother. And her requiem is a remembrance, yes, but one that would bring rest? Not so much. So I'll read some of the lyrics and I'll play some of it at the end. Why should I play this game of pretend, remembering through a secondhand sorrow? Such a great son and wonderful friend. Oh, don't the tears just pour. I could curl up and hide in my room, there in my bed, still sobbing tomorrow. I could give in to all the gloom, but tell me what for? Why should I have a heavy heart? Why should I start to break in pieces? Why should I go and fall apart for you? Why should I play the grieving girl and lie, saying that I miss you, and that my world has gone dark without your light? I will sing no requiem tonight. And then she goes on, I gave you the world, you threw it away, leaving these broken pieces behind you, everything wasted, nothing to say, so I sing no requiem. But then she hears his voice in her memory, in her heart. I hear your voice, I feel you near. Within these words, I finally find you. And now that I know that you are still here, I will sing no requiem tonight. Evan's letters begin with a lie, but bring healing to many people and courage to Evan as he's part of their grief process and builds some relationships. Zoe sings her truth, not a prayer of rest to Connor's soul, but it is part of her process of growing into rest in her grief and perspective. In grief, part of the pain comes from our feeling that we should not suffer like this, that it's fundamentally alien to our being. This, even though we all suffer, and frequently. But it is part of our experience of being human, this side of heaven's complete manifestation. It's part of our experience. And I wonder if by surrendering to our grief, that is, instead of fighting against it, the pain that loss surely brings about, that we might actually experience less actual pain or less intensely and see Jesus, who sits with us because we're taking the time, more clearly. We know in our heads that God is with us. We say it all the time. That Jesus experienced all manner of suffering so that we could know that Jesus knows. But grief is unreasonable. Grief often makes us do and say terrible things to each other. We don't think very clearly. So then how can we imagine that just knowing something about God will be useful when we can't be bothered to eat a meal or tell the time, so overcome by grief? It supersedes all of that. But maybe if we begin by thinking of it in a different way, thinking into it, we might imagine another way of understanding and experiencing grief. And this comes from string theory in quantum physics. Stay with me. It describes the fundamental constituent elements of nature, the fundamental aspects of nature, as tiny, vibrating, and looped strings. It's quite beautiful, and I don't understand it, but I love to imagine it. These elements are described by some as starting this primal energy, a sort of cosmic hum. Still more, theologian Barbara Holmes, who was just awesome, continues in this vein. She says, scientists and musicians are recording the sounds of resonant DNA frequencies. Who knew that DNA had frequencies? In these projects, raw data derived from the light absorption spectra of the four bases of light of the DNA, adenine, cytosine, is that right? Thymine and guanine, that make up the DNA molecule. It's converted into sonic frequencies. I have no idea how they do this, but it's pretty spectacular. And it's ready for the composer to create a new arrangement. So Dale Pond, a specialist, these are all these crazy things. He's a specialist in sympathetic vibratory physics. And this is what he says out of all of his knowledge, and it's beautiful. Genesis records God as having said light into being. But perhaps it would be more accurate to say that God sang light into being as the prelude to our cosmic dance, life. Jesus gives a sly hint that perhaps it is, as Pond suggests, after the Last Supper, the Godson steps out into the night with the disciples and head toward his uncertain fate, or their uncertain. But with a song. In Mark 14, it says, and when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Perhaps the resonance of this song held them in a moment of unity that could be recalled in the troubled days that were ahead. Perhaps, too, we can imagine and begin to compose a requiem for our time, for the virus, for our dailiness. As we hear and as we near Holy Week, following Jesus into Jerusalem, to the Mount, the supper, the garden, to the cross, and wait while the God-child, Jesus, saturates every space with divine human blood so that we don't have to. And perhaps if we greet the spectacular morning in which Jesus returns, having rendered inert any hum of death, down to the particle, perhaps our requiem Aetanam dona eis domine, eternal rest, will carry the hum of redemption to our relationships. That in our knowledge that God spoke, God sang into existence everything, enlivening every molecule, each particle of our being. And we have the power to mute our brother's song or crush a sister's dance and create discordant, screeching sounds. And we have the power to listen, to hear this sound that resonates deep within your neighbor. The God-breathed hum, uniquely strung and attuned to the creator of the universe, in tune with the one through whom all things were made, and who retuned it all. In concert with the one who sustains, maintains, energizes each particle, and all that constitutes everything that ever was and is to come. This God enlivened it all, gave life to it all. Perhaps we might approach the person next to us differently if we saw things in this way. God in between and in everything, humming. God said to Jeremiah, "No longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, 'Know the Lord,' because they shall all know me. I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more." Jesus already did this. But Jesus lamented, "Now my soul is troubled." But they misunderstood it. You asked me, should I ask this fate be overturned? He says, of course not. The Creator, the one who initiated this body form, this God is already glorified in it and will be glorified. That is, as in the tense of the verb suggest, it's already done while not actually indicating any time. It's timeless, yet active in this time and in the next moment and the next. And the people know this because they hear the hum of the song. They hear evidence of God's voice, the God who spoke it, even as God sang everything into being. The Greeks came to them and asked them about it and wanted to hear Jesus. And they heard because they had ears to hear. And I wonder if we understood the power of our songs, our lament, even the ones that claim to not be, like Zoe's. The song prayer, Requiem, eternal rest grant them, that we might come to hear the resonance of God's voice in the in-between spaces, between the heart and the lungs when we can't quite catch our breath, between the gut and the brain that tell us this pain is going to last forever, between the grief and the joy where Jesus stays, waits, retunes, composes, rest eternal in this moment and in the next moment. And the Requiem, we hum and vibrate together, seeing new life, seeing growth, new growth into the grain that decided not to hang on. Perhaps the resonance of our song can hold us in a moment of unity that can be recalled in the troubled days that are just ahead of us. Will we sing a requiem today, one that resonates and creates together? Will you, with me, listen to Zoe's song?